This episode is sponsored by Exactuals, perfecting insurance payments and the data driving them. So you are the head of the Global InsurTech with Willis Re. Just a little bit, orientation for people. Willis Re and Willis Towers Watson.
Yeah. So Willis Towers Watson. Sorry.
Yeah. No, how does it work?
Willis Towers Watson is a global risk consultant, which has multiple different parts to it. So there's a benefits delivery and administration part of the business which focuses on healthcare, specifically group healthcare, and then there is a part of the business that is focused on corporate risk and broking. So that's sort of retail broking for large businesses, and then there's the sort of part of the business that I work in, which is the reinsurance part of the business, where we essentially broke reinsurance for the market. So we have clients who are looking to cede certain risks into certain capital markets, and then within the context of that, there's lots of different types of reinsurance. But Willis Towers Watson, I think, is about 45,000 people big, and Willis Re, I think, is between 2,000 and 3,000 people. So a relatively small part of Willis Towers Watson, but a very, very valuable part. And we have offices all over the world. We have clients all over the world. We cover pretty much every single risk class available in the insurance industry. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to integrate Willis Re InsurTech throughout the entire business, because there's a lot that I can leverage too by having that different sort of overview into what's going on. So yeah, one of the big three brokers.
What do you think? Is there a disconnect between corporate offices, the people that sits in the reinsurer or the carrier, and their distribution channels, the agents?
I think it completely depends, right? So the answer is both yes and no.
Of course.
I think
there is a spectrum. There is always.
Absolutely. And I think, we should probably investigate what you mean by disconnect. But, are the motivations the same? Pretty much. Is the understanding of the underlying product the same? I would doubt it. Is the relationship with the end insured the same? No. But I would say that it's very line of business specific and it's very geographically specific. Similarly, certain insurers have an extremely close relationship with their agency network. Other insurers use multiple agency networks, and so you have this almost sort of delegated responsibility to provide them with the tools that they need, but you don't necessarily get involved in their day-to-day business. So it really is a spectrum, Gilad, and I don't know that one method is better than another, but if agents are able to derive very valuable intel from the end insured, the final consumer, which needs to be shared with the insurer to maintain that they are best in class or they're serving their end clients to the best of their ability, then they should look to be as connected to the agencies as they can be.
Can we talk about Aon?
I'd prefer not to, if that's okay.
Perfect, great, no worries. I had to try.
Yeah, fine, that's fine.
But let's talk about other mergers and acquisitions. 2020 has been a very busy year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen insurance companies acquiring all kinds of other units, Farmers, Prudentials, all over the place. We've seen startups. If we can we call Hippo still a startup? When do we stop calling Hippo a startup?
Well, there is a definition, and I think it's mainly predicated around number of staff. I think it has to be a couple of hundred members of staff, and there has to be a mature benefits program or something. But they're probably at the cusp now where they're no longer a startup. But there was so obviously Hippo bought Spinnaker, but Buckle, which I would argue is more of a startup, bought Gateway from Atlas. So there's definitely been an InsurTech startup by an incumbent balance sheet in 2020.
Yeah, we can say the same thing about Bold Penguin that acquired one or two companies and recently they had an interesting exit by themselves.
Yeah. I mean I was really pleased that happened actually. Not just because I think that both Bold Penguin and Risk Genius are great businesses, but I think we ran the risk last year, Gilad, of and I say we as an industry, of overemphasizing the IPO route almost as the only way to sort of reach the apex of success. That's obviously changed now with everyone going SPAC mad. But the Bold Penguin merge with Risk Genius was a nice reminder that there are lots of different ways of being successful in this space, and it doesn't just have to go from potential overvaluation in a mature round to an IPO, but it can actually be through very well thought through M&A.
Yes and no. Again, there is a certain distribution, but here it's actually, are you a technology provider or are you an insurance company, right? Intermediary or an actual carrier? And then it's a question, where can you go, right? We see more and more investments into the space, right? In your report, and we'll talk about the report because it's a great thing.
Thank you.
I can't believe that I said great, so I'll do my best to avoid great, amazing, and awesome. That's usually what I try to avoid here. I really enjoy reading the report.
Thank you.
But we're talking about 2020, $7.1 billion invested in almost 380 or 377 different deals.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So the investors, they need to see an exit. Now, if you are a technology, it's going to be an M&A, maybe an IPO, and now we have SPAC. If you're an insurance company, what's your exit strategy?
Right.
Now, usually, nowadays, it's more about the IPO and SPAC, but how many mergers and acquisitions do you see for the smaller products?
So just stepping back slightly, you are correct in that there are different types of investors in this space, and their exit strategies are multifaceted. Okay, so you have a lot of investment capital coming from insurers, reinsurers, and then the investment vehicles that they've set up, typically referred to as CVCs, who may be looking to invest to support businesses that they can license the technology of that directly speaks to their traditional business model. And so the criteria of success is different. And then on the opposite extreme, you have quite predatory investors who, generally speaking, are playing in the earlier rounds, who are looking to get a speculative return for their investment in a burgeoning tech business that is experiencing a degree of inflation relative to company valuation. And I think what was slightly concerning last year was that there was an over-acceleration of the route to IPO, which was overheating or looking to overheat certain businesses that have fantastic foundations for a long-term offering to the industry that were being rushed to go public for the benefit of somebody else. And it was a slightly concerning time, I would argue, which was why it was nice to see an internal M&A deal. So I think that InsurTech is now at a crossroads, Gilad, where because the terminology isn't clearly definable anymore, we do run the risk of seeing a number of companies that are going to self-identify as InsurTech for this sort of speculative opportunity that are otherwise just regular initiatives or regular companies in the insurance industry or looking to get into the insurance industry. If we are to assume that now pretty much any new initiative coming into the industry will be powered by technology and our industry becomes synonymous with technology, to what extent is the term InsurTech actually valuable? Because it's almost assumed now. And so we get asked a lot whether or not, investment into InsurTech is going to continue, when's it going to burst? And the answer is it's really hard to know, because if the terminology or the definition of the terminology keeps getting wider and wider and wider, then everything that is anything in our industry is going to be captured as an InsurTech investment. And actually what's happening, as I say, is just that the industry is becoming synonymous with technology. And so I don't want to see otherwise fantastic tech firms be rushed by people that have a very different mandate for success. And we are seeing fantastic businesses coming through. The early days of InsurTech were a bit ropey. There were some great firms and there were some not so great firms, but people are starting to really wake up to the opportunity. And I think our industry has done a very nice job of wanting to work with InsurTech. And the insurance and the reinsurance industry is criticised a lot, somewhat unfairly, in my opinion, of being slow and not wanting to adopt, not wanting to adapt. But that's just not what we're seeing. I mean, pretty much every insurer or reinsurer in the world has got a technology bent now, and I think InsurTechs for the most part have been welcomed by the industry. So yeah, like I said, I think we run the risk of needing to redefine what we mean by InsurTech if there is going to be an outside-in force of investors who are looking to return something to themselves. I think we just need to be a little bit conscious to make sure that the integrity of the businesses being invested in is maintained for a long-term opportunity for our industry.
How's the life in Nashville?
Nashville Life is good. We moved here in September from COVID. We had a very small apartment in Jersey City when I was working out of our Manhattan office, and that small apartment seemed to get smaller and smaller by the day as COVID continued. And my girlfriend worked in the ICU of our local hospital, and we sort of really were living through COVID firsthand, Gilad, and we just decided to move in September, and we've traded a small apartment for quite a big house, and we're now in the midst of a snowstorm. So I don't know how long it's going to go on for, but it's a nice place to be, and depending on what happens in the future, we may make this home. Watch this space.
Do you have a yard?
We have a very big yard. I won't embarrass people that don't have a yard by showing it to you, but you could keep animals on it.
I love it. I live in so I did my one small bedroom apartment when I was in Tel Aviv, and then we had like one bedroom, almost the same size, when my wife and I lived in New York. Now we have a nice luxury apartment in Los Angeles. The most important part is the balcony or the terrace. Really depends how you look at it. That is our gateway to, it's like 4-5 p.m. Yeah, it's wine time. It's our little bit 101. It's perfect.
That sounds perfect. I don't believe that you're waiting till 4 p.m. though, but that sounds
really
perfect.
Actually, recently it became like 5 that, sundown is a little bit later, but then we can always ask, do I do that based on Eastern or Pacific time? Right. But we try to do it with the sun, with the sundown.
Very good.
You have a very interesting background. And you have a Ph.D.
Yep.
So how did you end up in insurance? Before we talk about what you're actually doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I still don't know the answer, really. It's just a sort of fortuitous series of circumstances. I sort of went to university many years ago, not really knowing what I wanted to do. Started studying economics and Japanese, and as I was sort of looking to graduate, the Lehman Brothers crash happened, and nobody was hiring. So I thought, well, maybe I should go back to university and just sort of prolong this. So I went back and did a master's in economics, and then as my master's sort of was taking shape, I was offered the opportunity to do a Ph.D. And I chose to do it in political violence, specifically genocide, as it pertained to Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge. And
wait. Let me understand. You did your master's in economics and your PhD in genocide.
Yeah. So
Okay.
my master's in economics was in Southeast Asian economics, specifically around development economics, and a big part of our sort of module was on Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Philippines. And as I was studying Cambodia in the 70s, there was just this dearth of literature, and I was just really interested to understand more about that particular part of the world at that particular time. Yeah, I just sort of stumbled across this sort of hypothesis one day and pitched it to a tutor who thought it was a good enough idea for it to become a PhD. And that's really what happened. And the UK economy, I'm obviously from the UK originally, so I was in London at that time. The UK economy hadn't really bounced back to the extent that people my age were being hired. So I thought, why not? And yeah, so I began that journey, moved to Cambodia for a few years, and then came home and graduated. And at that time, I sort of didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I started working with a friend who had a startup, alpaca shearing. So I started shearing alpacas and llamas. We started in Germany and then ended up doing a lot of work in the States.
Alpacas in Germany?
Yeah, there are hundreds of thousands of alpacas across Europe, and so we were shearing in the States, and I ended up in LA at the end of one of our tours. I was in Pasadena, and I ended up speaking to somebody who ran a sea cucumber farm in Indonesia, and he was just back in LA for a little bit of time, and he said, you know, what do you do for a living? And I didn't really have a good answer. So he asked me if I wanted to go and farm sea cucumbers with him in Indonesia. And I was at a stage of my life where I thought, why not? So moved to Indonesia, lived there for 6 months. And then during that time, I was contacted by the UN, who themselves were running a tribunal in Cambodia. And they said, look, we've just come across your PhD. There's a lot of data and information in this that pertains to a particular case file. Can we buy your PhD from you? And you know, I needed the money, so I said, absolutely, of course you can. Put a red ribbon on it. And then about a week later, I was contacted by a law firm who said, look, we'd really like to hire you as a consultant because we're working very closely on what you've written about. So I then started working at the UN as a historical consultant to a law firm. And then the case file that we were working on came to an end at the beginning of 2016. I decided to move back to the UK. I sort of had enough genocide for a lifetime. And I was introduced to the then CEO of Willis Re, a gentleman called John Kavanagh, who was looking to hire somebody to run alternative research projects for what was being coined at the time emerging risks and opportunities in the insurance industry. And specifically, they wanted somebody to run that initiative who didn't have an insurance or a reinsurance bias, to sort of question why things were being done, if this was the right way to do things, if we could think about things differently. And at the time, Gilad, the world was going crazy over certain buzzwords. So blockchain and fintech and cyber and the sharing economy. But what was sort of really gathering momentum was this term insurtech. And Willis Re obviously has an amazing client base of insurers, MGAs and reinsurers. But at the time that I joined, we didn't really have a function that spoke specifically to insurtech. And, you know, the business answer to how clients could deal with the emergence of insurtech was sort of handled on a very parochial basis. And it was about October, I think it was October 2016, the first InsurTech Connect conference was being hosted in Las Vegas. And a colleague said, oh, you should probably go to this. So off I trotted to Las Vegas and met some wonderful people, many of whom I'm still in regular contact with now. And I had a bit of a light bulb moment while I was there, because there were people with great ideas. There were markets with money to spend. There were investors with money to spend. There were people that had perhaps less insurance DNA than they required to launch these great ideas. And I thought, well, we're an intermediary in the market for so many other things. Why can't we be an intermediary here? And why can't we put people together? Why can't we match risk with capital? Why can't we find expertise for certain classes of business? And so I went home back to the UK and pitched the idea of launching a department within Willis Re, a fully integrated vertical within every part of Willis Re that spoke to InsurTech. And my boss supported the idea. And so in January of 2017, I launched Willis Re InsurTech with the expressed understanding of trying to distill down what was quite a complicated space. And I'm sure you remember in the early 2017s, everybody was still trying to find their way. The term didn't really have a solid definition. But more than anything, Gilad, our clients were quite paranoid about being disrupted, and that was a regular question to us: was, how do I avoid being usurped? How do I avoid being disintermediated? And the only way to answer that question was really to speak to the insurtechs and ask them if that was their agenda. And unsurprisingly, most of them did not think about disruption in a traditional sense, at least. They wanted to work with our clients. They wanted to enrich, enable, enhance what they were doing. And so when I sort of had the opportunity to share that with our traditional client base, they said, okay, Andrew, if you meet a company that's doing X, Y, or Z, we'd love to meet them, right? And that was the kind of genesis of the department. And then if we fast forward to now, Gilad, I run Willis Re InsurTech globally. I have a team of 30 people based all over the globe. So I've got people in North America, people in Europe, people in Asia, people in Australia. And they're all looking for best-in-class insurtechs to bring into the business. And what I mean by that is either sort of bringing technology to bear via partnerships with our traditional client base, or if they are insurtechs that have a standalone proposition where they originate risk, or in some cases where Willis Re will become a client of a technological proposition. And it's that middle pillar that's really grown in the last 12 months, which is where insurtechs who originate risk are starting to mature, they're starting to grow, and they're now looking at their balance sheet and thinking, how can I better capitalize my balance sheet more efficiently? And they're looking at the reinsurance markets. And we've been lucky enough to have a really great group of insurtech clients in that space. Sorry, now, and then and I was going to say, and then finally, I guess the thing that I'm best known for is the Willis Towers Watson quarterly InsurTech briefing, which was started at that beginning period in 2017 between Willis Re and Willis Securities. And we really just wanted to share our learnings, and we wanted to share our learnings at scale and not have to wait for those individual client meetings to say, this is our view on InsurTech based on all these conversations that we've been having. I think to date we've vetted some 1,500 InsurTechs, and we closely monitor the investment landscape. And each quarter I try and talk about something thought-provoking. I try and share the news. But in all honesty, it's quite a small part of my day job. I mean, running Willis Re InsurTech is by far the biggest part of my day job. But like I said, it's probably the thing I'm best known for.
Thank you. No, I love that. Because, your introduction now, you covered so many different things that I just held myself not to interrupt you and ask a follow-up question. I read a lot of InsurTech decks, and one of the things that they jump at the beginning, it's like, oh, we are going to disrupt.
Right.
And we are not looking for disruption. We are looking for empowerment, improvement. There are so many different things. But connecting that to what you said, it's a question now that I actually had a debate recently with a couple of investors. Do you, CVC, or a fund that invests in the InsurTech or FinTech space, do you invest in competitors? So, because there are a few, there are ventures, mainly CVCs, that will say, okay, this is our strategy, this is sort of the mandate of our one LP, and we are going to invest in something that we want to, and that can be a little bit competing. It's an area that we want the mothership to enjoy. However, if you're coming from outside, would you invest in 2 or 3 different car insurance?
Right.
Or how do you differentiate between them later on? Because they are appealing for the more affluent, they are for the price sensitive, etc. So I think that, go ahead.
So I mean, I think so most of the firms, with the exception of Duck Creek, most of the firms that have gone public are risk originators, and you could argue that it's disruptive in nature to want to take market share. But the vast majority of insurtechs who will do well in our industry will be providing solutions that can be licensed by multiple carriers at once. That actually provides long-term value. Individual risk originating businesses probably won't create macro value for the industry unless in part of their evolution they're designing technology that can be licensed by other people. But I mean, disruption is such a relative term, right? And I do think the greatest, well, the 2 greatest forms of disruption that we've seen, one of them is a very positive form of disruption. It's sort of Schumpeterian gale of disruption, which forces our industry to become awake to the value of technology. And I think insurtechs have done a really nice job of waking our industry up to the value of technology. The second form of disruption, Gilad, is really the extent to which a traditional competitor can wield technology better than another traditional competitor. So you're almost arming them with a better tool or a better weapon, and that's really where we've seen disruption. But it's the industry is moving in the right direction, in my opinion, and it's not for lack of available technology that we haven't digitized sooner. I think if you look at any evolution around digital transformation or any kind of new invention, the community has got to want to accept it. And that's kind of the step at which we are now, in that the industry is awake, the industry wants to adopt, it wants to innovate. And so there's this great array of technology in front of them that they can benefit from. And I think the 2 things are starting to come together nicely now.
It is. And especially thanks to 2020, in my opinion, because it has been a chaotic year, right? I thought about using your word, which I find it super hard to pronounce. Never mind. Tumultuous. I hope.
Perfect. Tumultuous. Lovely.
Thank you. I work on it on a daily basis, starting tomorrow. Well, it's been very chaotic. On one side, we've seen paid losses of $200 billion.
Yep.
On the other side, that's the best time for insurtech to shine.
Absolutely, and that's what we've seen. So, the combination of events, negative events that COVID has created for the industry are unprecedented. I don't think ever before you've had a paid loss in conjunction with poorly performing markets happening at such global scale, where simultaneously certain risk classes are fundamentally transforming at the same time, in addition to the fact that operationally our businesses in the industry are being expected to perform in a different way. People are being expected to work from home. And if you look back to any other major events that the industry has dealt with from a paid loss perspective, there have always been other nets of safety that they can rely on. This just hasn't been the case. But, and this is the important part, also never before have we had access to technology and technologists to the extent that we have now, who can actually help us get through this issue. And I think anybody that was doubting the value of technology 12 months ago probably isn't anymore. And that's a really great endorsement of the technology being brought into the industry.
In your report, you brought use cases from carriers that you work with. One of the ones, which is great in English, was with Adrian Gore from Discovery in South Africa. And he's talking about using wearables and the data that come in. Calorie intake, activity, glucose levels. I love the concept of how it utilized, but we heard it and in so many things about using, let's call it lifestyle applications. Mm-hmm. But there are 2 questions that I always ask myself there. Where the regulator stands on that? Because it's supposed to be improving the underwriting efficiency?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, are they proactive? If they see some sort of signal, and especially during COVID, our lifestyle changed completely, what are the actions that the carrier can take?
Mm-hmm. So Discovery is a very interesting incumbent insurance company in that it was a very early pioneer of technology as it related to risk relating to individual insureds. And they launched Gilead something called the Vitality Program, which is now available all over the world. And it was really, really quite revolutionary in that it wanted to reward conscientious insureds who were able to demonstrably illustrate that their behavior was better than the demographic average that they presided in. Okay. The beauty of Vitality is it became almost an embedded sort of ecosystem where, to an extent, the insurance was actually the sort of least interesting part of what they were doing. They were really encouraging people to be fit and healthy. They were offering lots of different incentives, lots of different rewards. And ultimately, as an insurer, that's kind of what you want to do. You want to, be writing very well balanced risks that are good value for money, but to the extent that you can triage an underwriting process where you get to the types of risks that you ultimately want to write that meet your capital appetite. Anything that you can do to keep that process under control or under your own control is generally seen as a win. Now, what they're doing or what they've been doing is almost becoming table stakes now in our industry, but they really were a pioneer of this. And with the proliferation of wearables and devices on our bodies, lots of life and health and accident insurers can do the same sort of thing. What's particularly interesting is that we are seeing the adoption in the P&C space as well, particularly around things like smart home, IoT devices in the house or in the car. And in heavy commercial as well, we're seeing increased use of prop tech technology. But in both classes, so both life and health and P&C, the underwriting hypothesis is really around understanding which behavioral data are better indicators of potential risks relative to demographic data that insurers have been using to underwrite for, in some cases, decades. And it's understanding that balance between the two whilst maintaining a portfolio that means that people don't become uninsured as a result of over rewarding people that on paper at least look like very low risks.
So, before we are concluding our conversation, which I'm very sad to do, what do you think is going to happen in 2021?
That's a really great question. I think we'll still see a number of insurtechs go public. I think we'll still see a lot of M&A activity. To my earlier point, I think because the definition of insurtech is being stretched and adopted sort of wider and wider by the day, I think we'll see a continuation of a lot of investment dollars going into insurtech. What I might try and do this year is actually carve out a box in that group and say this in 2016 is what we would have called an insurtech, and try and understand the extent to which it's been inflated. But I think that the industry, from an operational perspective, Gilead will look to create a hybrid model for workers. I think people will slowly return to offices if they want to. I think that underwriting will become increasingly intelligent as we do move towards behavioral data. And I think we'll be in a period of transition. Is the travel insurance industry going to recover this year? I don't know. But there's certainly been a rise of gig economy and SME product demand. So I think it's just going to be, much like last year, a period of understanding change. I think people are also waking up to other sort of systemic issues and more sort of more sort of ethereal issues around things like climate change. I think we'll see a big growth in that. A lot of insurtechs are looking at climate at the moment, and this is sort of an endemic problem that matters to all of us. So more of the same, really, I think is what I'm trying to say.
So one last thing, beside moving to Tennessee or to Texas or Nashville and Austin, any other recommendations, life hacks, or a book that you can recommend the audience?
Oh, there's two books I love. Nothing to do with insurance, though. Is that okay?
Of course. It
Okay,
can be
so
fantasy, it can be a novel, it can be self-improvement, whatever you like.
So both of these things sort of do resonate, though, as far as insurance is concerned. And one of them is called The Butchering Art, and the other one is called The Knife Man. And they are about two surgeons in the UK who were ahead of their time, Gilad, totally ahead of their time. One of them was Joseph Lister, who pioneered antiseptics and the use of certain types of acids to reduce infections. And what's really interesting about those books, as I think about insurance, is much like InsurTech, they pioneered these things that were truly revolutionary. And retrospectively, you'd think, well, why wouldn't the entire industry, or why wouldn't all of the surgeons just adopt these practices? But they had a cultural hurdle to overcome, which was understanding that the community that you want to support has got to accept your ideas, not be offended by your ideas, and actually innovate around those things. And there's a really sad story of a surgeon called Ignor Semmelweis, who you might have heard of, who suggested that surgeons should wash their hands between surgery, and that they were somehow vectors of infection. And they were so offended, Gilad, that the surgeon community was so offended by this guy's assertion that they themselves might be to blame, that they put him in a mental hospital. So yeah, those are great books. But stay healthy, eat well, cook, drink delicious wine if you can, go for walks, exercise, and remember that life is as much about play as it is about work. And as fascinating as insurance and InsurTech is, I'm still going out on long walks and trying to spend time with loved ones and just try and be as happy as I can be in these otherwise very peculiar times.
Andrew, thank you very, very, very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Gilad. Thank you for having me. Thank you.